The road to Ocean Moor gave out a mile short of the gates, and Aloan fairly walked the rest through a downpour that had turned the moor to running slate. Her boots filled, her trunk sat abandoned on a carter's wagon behind her, the man refusing to risk his horses another yard. In her two hands, she carried the one thing she would trust to no cart, a flat roll of oiled leather, tied twice, that had been her father's. She heard the crowd before the house showed itself. Many voices flattened by the wind, and beneath them a sound that stopped her heart, and then set her running, a young man screaming and fighting not to. The drive opened onto a graveled court full of people. A loaded cart had gone over at the foot of the steps, and pinned beneath its splintered shaft lay a stable lad of 16, his leg badly hurt beneath the timber. Aloan saw at a glance that a great vessel had been struck, and that a hurt like that could take a life in minutes if no steady hand reached it. A heavy gentleman in a good coat knelt over him with a strap and a bright saw laid ready on a cloth. "The leg is past saving," he announced, loud enough for the whole yard to hear him be certain. "Hold him fast or he'll bleed away while we debate it. Leave him." The words were out of her before she had chosen them. She was already on her knees beside him. The leather roll open at her side, pressing the flat of her hand hard and high on the inside of his leg, until she felt the great vessel leap and go still beneath her fingers. The danger simply stopped. "Your strap above my hand, tight as you dare," she told the surgeon without looking up. And to the nearest groom, "Your neckcloth folded small." "Madam," the gentleman said, going scarlet, "I am the— You are standing in my light. The bone is whole. It is the vessel that is cut, and I have it. Take your saw to him now, and you will bury a boy who might have walked by Michaelmas." He gave her the strap. She worked quickly then, in the rain. Curved, needle, waxed, thread, the worn lancet her father had carried 30 years. She did not see the tall man come down the steps and stop, 3 treads up, and go still. She saw only the boy's gray face and the vessel beneath her thumb, and kept her breathing slow on purpose, because a frightened creature borrows its calm from the one who holds it. "Easy now," she murmured. "It is only a cart and a bad afternoon." By degrees the boy's breath came down out of terror into plain pain, and then into something near quiet. She tied the last knot, packed and bound the wound, and only then sat back on her heels to find the whole court gone silent, every face turned to her. The man on the steps was younger than his stillness suggested, 30 perhaps, dark hair blacked with the wet, a face a woman might have called handsome, had it not so plainly shut its own door and dropped the key down a well. He watched her the way a man watches a figure that refuses to add. "Carry him in a warm room and do whatever she tells you," he said, and a dozen men moved at once. Then to her, "You are not Skeen. Skeen is my surgeon, Mr. Bree." Skeen was about to take a boy's leg for want of a hand on the right vessel. She got to her feet, her gown ruined to the waist, and her hands not yet washed clean, too spent to remember she had come here to be no one. "Forgive me. I could not stand and watch it." He came down the last of the steps. "You are the woman. My grandmother sent for the companion. You are 3 days late. The Ammer Bridge is down at Netherby, Your Grace. I walked the last of the road. My name is Fairley." Behind him, an old woman had appeared in the doorway. Very small, very upright, wrapped in gray, with eyes that had missed nothing in a long life and did not mean to begin now. At her skirt stood a dark little girl of 5 or 6, who stared at the blood with a look that was neither fright nor curiosity but something worse. Recognition, as though she knew exactly what it meant when the red came and did not stop. "Well," said the old woman, dry as a struck bell, "I sent for someone to read to me of an evening, and the storm has washed me up a surgeon who commands your grooms better than you do. Bring her in, grandson, before she perishes on the step." The Duke did not move at once. He looked at the ruined gown, the hands not yet clean, the leather roll pressed to her chest as though it were all she owned, which was very nearly true. "My grandmother means to make you mistress of this place before your boots are off," he said. "She writes that the house wants a woman's hand, and here one is, come up the drive, dressed as a companion. She has half a mind to make a duchess of you and be done. She is 80 and does as she chooses." It was said half in jest, half as a test, to see what the drenched, unaccountable woman on his gravel would do with it. And it struck exactly where she stood, least offended, for a duchess is looked at by every soul in 3 counties, named and printed in the papers. And there was a man in the South who had sworn to find her wherever she ran, and a roll pressed to her heart that half the world would ruin her to hold. So the words came before she could catch them, low and fierce, the rain on her face and the work of the afternoon still on her hands. "I will never be your duchess," she whispered. The Duke of Ravenshire looked at the small, drenched, unafraid woman who had saved a life on his own stones, and now told him, on his own steps, exactly what she would never be, and, for the first time and longer than his household could remember, something behind the shut door of his face came awake. He smiled. It was not a large smile, but the whole court saw it happen. "We'll see about that," he said, and turned and went into the house. Old Halcombe the butler watched from the dry of the doorway. 40 years he had served the family, and never once seen his master smile at a stranger in the rain. He said nothing, but he went down into the weather himself to carry the young woman's trunk when the cart at last brought it up, having decided, on no evidence he could name, that this one was worth the wedding. Eloan Fairley had come to Ashenmore to vanish, and she had told the Dowager Duchess only so much of the truth as would win her the post. She had written that she was a physician's daughter, orphaned and without means, obliged to earn her own bread. Every word of it was true. It was what she left out that would have cost her the place and, very likely, her freedom. She had not written that her father, Dr. Sylvanus Fairley of Wexcombe, had been the ablest fever doctor in the western counties, nor that he had died leaving her 2 things of worth and 1 of danger. The worth was a book, 40 years of remedies in his cramped, exact hand, and among them a single draft, in a proportion he had confided to no living soul but her, that broke the marsh fever when whole cities had given the sufferer up for lost. Men had offered a fortune for the naming of it. He had refused them all, and died with the secret in his book and in his daughter's head, and nowhere else on earth. The danger was a man. Sir Osric Thorne had been her father's creditor, and he grasped at once that the book, not the debt, was the price, and that the neat, respectable road to a dead man's daughter's property ran through marriage to his son. He laid it before her as a kindness. She refused him in a cold parlor one October dusk, and he left off smiling and told her gently what a girl alone with a dead man's debts and no protector might expect. She had gone within the fortnight, a false direction, a plain borrowed name, and the book stitched into the false floor of her workbox beneath the darning wool. 2 years, and a small legacy would fall to her, clean and free. She could be no one for 2 years. She had been no one. Most of her life already. She had not reckoned on Ashenmore. Ashenmore was a beautiful house, and its beauty only made the ruin harder to watch. It stood long and low and silver-gray above a fold of its own moor, and it was failing slowly from the inside, and no one beneath its roof would put a name to it. Alaman saw how within a week, for the reading of a house's health had been the first thing her mother ever taught her, and very nearly the last. The plate was blackening in the drawers. The linen presses breathed damp, and the good sheets had gone unturned so long they had rotted along their own folds. Half the room stood shut and sheeted, and the shut ones carried the faint sweet smell that means a roof has been letting the weather in for a 12-month, while no one has climbed up to look. The kitchen range smoked for a flue left unswept, and the cook, a broad, kindly woman named Mrs. Truscott, wept over a side of mutton, come in green from Netherby, that she dared not send back, because she said, wiping her red hands on her apron, Mr. Vellicott settled with the butcher, and Mr. Fellicott, prawned with the butcher. Vellicott would not be told his business by a cook. "And who is Mr. Vellicott?" Elowen asked. "The steward, miss, the agent. He came in the old Duke's time, and old Mrs. Cardew that kept the house went into the ground the winter after her late ladyship. There's been no housekeeper since, only Mr. Vellicott, that carries every key and answers to no living soul." "There is no housekeeper," Elowen said slowly, "in a house of this size. There's Mr. Vellicott," the cook repeated helplessly, as though the name both answered the question and unasked it in the same breath, and she could not have told you which. Elowen looked at the smoking range, and the spoiled meat, and the fear on an honest woman's face, and she understood the shape of the whole thing before she held a single figure to prove it by. She had kept a household from the age of 14 after her mother died. A small one, a doctor's house of no account, but kept it she had. And she knew what a linen press ought to smell of, and she knew that mutton should never come in green, and she knew, above all, that a house where one man held every key and answered to no one was a house being bled, patiently, from within. She said none of it. She had come here to be no one. She folded her hands, learned the servants' names, went up at 4 o'clock to read to the dowager, and held her tongue. She held it for 11 days. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenshire was named Theodosia, and at 79 she let very little pass her, in the room or out of it. She kept to the small south parlor, the one room in a cold house that held on to its warmth, with a spine like a fire iron and a pair of eyes the years had left alone. On that first afternoon, she looked Elowen over for a slow minute and said, "You are not what I sent for. I am sorry to have disappointed your grace." I did not say disappointed. I said, "You are not what I sent for." The two stand a mile apart, and a girl who means to make her way had best learn to tell them by their walk. She tapped the arm of her chair. "Sit there, by the window where the light falls on you. My grandson tells me you took a boy's leg out of Skeen's hands in the rain. Do not shrink, and call it nothing. Skeen has put 3 men in the churchyard that I could name. Where does a companion learn to close a cut artery in a storm? My father was a physician, ma'am. I kept his house and carried his bag." The clever old eyes rested on her, a beat too long, and Elowen felt the cold breath of her own secret at the back of her neck. But the dowager only nodded and let it pass, and turned her face to the fire. And when she spoke again, the sharpness had drained out of her, and something older and heavier had settled in its place. "The child you saw in the doorway, my great-granddaughter, Tamsin. She has not said one word in 2 years. She was 3 when it happened. And Skeen calls her simple, and Skeen is a fool. She is not simple. She is waiting." "For whom, ma'am?" "Her mother, my granddaughter Ottilie, Tamsin's mother, and mistress of this house, for my grandson never married. There was no Duchess, so Ottilie carried the keys and kept the whole place breathing. Then 2 springs ago a fever took her, and in 9 days she was in the ground at Netherby Church, 33 years old, and the house has held its breath ever since. Her eyes came up bright and pitiless. My grandson has not set foot in her wing since. He will not speak her name, nor look at one thing that wants mending. For everything that wants mending was hers. He signed whatever Mr. Blatt. Vellicott lays before him, eats alone at a table built for 30, and lets the roof rot over his head. Do you follow me? I think I do, ma'am. I believe you do. Which is why you are the first companion in a 12-month I have not turned off before the week was out. She folded her ruined hands. You have been here 11 days, and held your tongue for 10. I have not the years to spend on tact. Tell me what you have seen, and do not soften it. So Elowen told her the smoking flue, the green meat, the sheeted rooms, the rotted linen, the roof letting weather into the shut wing, and, carefully, Mr. Vellicott, who paid every account, held every key, and could be corrected by no one. The dowager heard her out without a flicker. "My grandson is no fool," she said at last. "He is a grieving man, which looks the same from across a room, and is nothing like it underneath. He has handed one man the reins, because he cannot bear to hold them himself. It is his one weakness, and it may prove a costly one." She turned her head. "You have a head for figures. Do not fence with me. I have told you I cannot abide it. I shall give you the still room, the linen, and the household books, on my authority, which in this house is older and harder than Mr. Vellicott's. We shall see what a doctor's daughter turns up when she goes looking." The gleam sharpened. "My grandson tells me you swore, in the rain, that you would never be his Duchess. I spoke out of turn, your grace." "You spoke the first true word said to that boy in 2 years, and he has not stopped turning it over since, which is more thought than he has given anything since we buried Ottilie. He wagers me you will be gone by autumn. I have known him 30 years, child. He never bets against a thing, unless he is afraid to the bone that it will come true. See that he loses." The house did not believe in her, and it said so below stairs, where it thought she could not hear. By the end of her first week, a book was running in the servants' hall. A shilling that the new companion would be packed off by the spring, like the 3 before her, worn down by the cold rooms and the grieving master and the soft-spoken steward who ruled the pair of them. The odds ran long against her. Even Marin, the under-housemaid, who liked her, had laid a quiet 6pence on the month. Eloan knew of the wager within days, for a woman long used to being overlooked catches a great deal that louder people never notice they have let fall. She did not take it ill. It struck her on the whole as a shrewd bet. She had made much the same one against herself when she signed a borrowed name, and came north with 15 shillings in a false direction. She did not mean to win it by arguing. She had never once in her life carried anything by argument. She meant to win it the only way she trusted, by making herself so needful that one morning the house could no longer picture a week that had run without her, and the wager would be forgotten because the question behind it had stopped meaning anything. So she never scolded, and never gave an order she could avoid giving, and never once reminded a soul that the dowager had lent her authority. She simply took up the work no one else would touch, one piece after another, and did each so well that the doing argued for her. She began with the still room, because a neglected still room is the first place a failing house betrays itself. She scoured it out, tipped 3 years of soured cordials and weevilled flour into the pig pail, and at the back found a run of shelves that had plainly been the dead Ottilie's own, neat labels in a young woman's round hand, rose water and elder syrup, and a linctus for a child's cough. Every jar spoiled now, every one untouched since the spring she died. Eloan washed them all and kept the labels. She would not be the one to bin a dead woman's careful hand. She could not have said, then, how much would turn upon that small refusal. She went next to the linen, and had the maids strike every press, and wash, and mend, and turn the whole of it, and where a sheet had rotted past, saving, she cut it down for bandages and dusters, so that nothing was thrown away. She had the flue swept, which cost 8pence, and ended a year of smoke at breakfast. She sent the green mutton back to Netherby with a note in her own hand, civil and unbudging, and the next joint came in red. And she began, without fuss, to keep the kitchen book herself, a small thing, only what came in at the door, and what was paid for it. Week by week it was, all the dowager had granted her. But a house is a single body, and a hand laid on one vein can feel whether the whole heart runs true. Meanwhile, the boy mended. Jory Trewin was his name, and she dressed his leg morning and night in the little room off the stable, and by the 2nd week he could sit up and be ashamed of the trouble he made, and by the 3rd he could stand, and the servants' hall watched the companion cross the frosted yard at first light, with her father's roll under her arm to tend a stable lad no finer person would have crossed the court for, and something in the house began, very quietly, to turn. Mrs. Truscott, the cook, took to leaving the best of the cream where Eloan would find it. Halcombe, the butler, who trusted no one under 60 as a matter of principle, began bringing her the small snags of the household he had used to carry, uselessly, to a shut door. The maids brought her their troubles now, instead of weeping into the coal scuttle. Without a title, and without ever setting out to. She had begun to run the house, and the child began to follow her. It started at the still-room door. Eloan would look up from her jars to find Tamsin standing there, grave and silent, watching her hands. She did not send her off, and she did not press her. And, unlike everyone else in that house, she did not talk at the child too brightly and too much to paper over the terrible quiet. She only went on with her work and now and then said some small thing to the air, as she had once spoken to a dying boy in the rain. "This one is rose water. Your mother made it. See her hand? A careful hand." And day by day the child came a step nearer, and a step nearer, the way every true thing in that house came to Eloan, not driven, not coaxed, only given no reason to be afraid. She told herself none of it was her concern. She had come to Ashenmore to be no one for 2 years, not to nurse a house, nor a grieving man, nor a silent child. She very nearly believed it. The Duke of Ravenshire noticed her the way a man notices a change in the season, not at all. And then all at once he did not go down to the still room or the kitchen. Those were another country to him. But he could not help remarking that the flue no longer smoked over his breakfast, that his coffee came up hot, and that the great dining table where he ate alone each night, 30 feet of black oak, one place laid at the far end like a man supping at the foot of a grave, had one evening grown shorter, cut down to a plain 6 feet, so that it no longer looked like a monument to a family that had died out. "Who has done this?" he asked Halcombe. "Miss Fairley, your grace." She thought you might dine more easily. She said it was a sorry thing for a man to sit so far from his own salt cellar. A pause. "Shall I have the leaves put back?" The Duke looked a long moment at the small, warm table. "No," he said. He met her 3 days after in the long gallery, by the kind of accident that was the only sort of meeting he allowed himself that year. She stood aside for him against the wall, a basket of mended linen on her hip, her eyes lowered as a servant ought. He passed her. Then he stopped. "You are the woman with the Trowan boy," he said, "and the table. And, my grandmother tells me, the better half of my household." "Yes, your grace." He looked at her then, properly, for the first time since the storm. She was small and plain and brown-haired, the kind a crowded room forgets it has seen. But when she raised her face, her eyes were level and gray and clear and wholly without fear, and no one living had looked at him so in 2 years. His servants kept their eyes on the carpet. His grandmother looked past him as though he were a window. This woman looked at him as though he were simply a man owed a plain answer, and she were weighing how much of it he could take. He had forgotten what it was to be seen. "You told me, in the rain," he said, "that you would never be my Duchess. I spoke out of turn, sir. I was cold and frightened, and had just brought a boy back from the very edge of death. It was the truest thing anyone has said to me since my sister died." He set the word sister down carefully. "Everyone else tells me what they suppose I wish to hear. You told me what you would not do. I have thought about it more than I can account for." She did not know what to say to that, and so for once said nothing. "The Trowan boy," he went on, abruptly as if the silence cost him. "Will he walk? He will walk, sir. He may run by harvest. If he minds me." "Good," he said, and looked as though he had a great deal more to say, and no idea where to begin, and so said none of it, and went on down the gallery, not knowing why his house felt for that moment a shade less like a tomb. Eloan watched him go and thought, "There is a kind man in there, and the water has closed over his head." Then she thought of the leaking roof, the workbox with its false floor, and a promise made to her in an October dusk, and told herself that none of it was hers to mend. She had come to be safe, not to haul a duke from deep water. She had almost believed it. Let me pause us there a moment. If this story has taken hold of you, the kindest thing you can do, and the thing that keeps tales like it coming, is to subscribe before we go on. Now, back to Ashen Moor, and a small book of figures that had begun, quietly, to refuse to add. For that same week, Eloan set her honest kitchen book beside the quarterly reckoning, Mr. Velicott pinned to the board for form's sake, and found the two at odds. The butcher at Netherby was paid 9 shillings a week. He had shown her his own notched tally to prove it, but the posted reckoning, in Velicott's careful hand, read 14 and 6, 5 and 6, on one tradesman, every week, walking quietly out of the house and into no name at all. She sat over the 2 columns by a single candle and understood she had laid her finger on the edge of something very large, and that, once seen, it would not let her go, however sensibly she told herself to look away. She did not go to the Duke. She turned it over for 3 days and 3 nights, and did not go, and her reasons were sound, and one of them was plain fear. To go to the Duke was to be seen, and to be seen was to be asked her name, her people, her history, and behind her name stood Sir Osric Thorne, and a debt, and a marriage she had crossed half of England to slip. A companion who crossed the Steward would be turned off without a character. A companion turned off without a character would be looked for, and once looked for, once named in a county sheet, she was found. Better to keep her head down and let a rich house rob itself for the 2 years she needed. It was not her house, it was not her quarrel. She told herself all of that. She might have gone on telling it, had the storeroom not backed onto the estate office, and had the door between them not, one raw afternoon, stood unlocked. Mr. Velicott was gone to the quarter sessions at Netherby. The Dowager's authority had sent Eloan to number the household plate, and the numbering carried her, slate in hand, down the north passage to the very door of the office. No one else in the house held the key to, and it was ajar. She told herself she was only counting spoons. She stood in the doorway and looked at the shelf of ledgers, and the first thing she saw, the thing that stopped her breath, was that there were 2 books for the running year. 2 estate ledgers bound alike in the same brown calf standing side by side. One was rubbed soft at the corners with handling. The other looked barely opened. She knew she ought not to touch them. She opened the clean one first. It was the fair copy, the book that was shown on the rare day a thing was shown at all. Rents received all tidy. The estate, a little poor but honest. The tenants paid up. The repairs entered and accounted. The roof over the west tower, she noticed, had been made good last autumn at a cost of £40. She had stood beneath that roof not a week since, and watched the rain come through it in 5 places onto the shrouded furniture of a dead woman's rooms. She opened the worn one. The worn one was the truth, and the truth was foul. Here were the rents, as they had truly been gathered, higher, case upon case, than the fair book confessed. Widows and small holders squeezed a shilling here, a shilling there, and the shillings turning up nowhere in the book the Duke would ever see. Here were repairs paid for that had never been done, the tower roof among them, £40 handed to a Netherby man who, she would later learn, had never laid a slate at Ashen Moor in his life. Here were tradesmen's bills marked settled at one figure in the fair book, and paid at a lower in the true, the difference sliding off the edge of the page and out of the house, a steady, quiet stream of it running away to no name at all. Eloan stood in the failing light and understood that she was looking at 3 years of theft. Not a servant lifting a spoon. This was a man stripping a house to the bone, patiently, in good ink, while its master grieved above and could not bear to look. Velicott had settled into just such a house, no mistress, no housekeeper, a master who would set his hand to anything rather than lift the cover of his sister's books, the way damp settles into a beam. And then she saw the thing that turned theft into something worse. In the worn book, 3 springs gone. In the very weeks before Ottilie died, the hand changed. For a stretch of pages, the entries were made not in Vellicotte's careful copperplate, but in a woman's round hand. The same hand, she knew it at once, that had labeled the cordial jars in the still room Ottilie's hand. And beside 3 of the figures, in that same round hand, small, sharp marks, a query, a line drawn hard under a sum, and in the margin, tilted to the last of the light, so that she had to lean to read it, a single word, wrong. And lower down, ask him, and beside a third, scored so deep the nib had torn the paper. Where does this go? Ottilie had found it. Before ever a fever touched her, the mistress of Ashenmore had begun to see what Elowen saw now, and had begun, in her own hand, in the steward's own book, to ask the one question that had no safe answer. And then, 9 days into a spring fever, she had died. The floor of Elowen's stomach dropped clean away, and in the same instant she heard the outer door. There was no time to think. She set the worn book back exactly as it had stood, corner squared to corner with its twin, and she was in the storeroom with the slate, counting plate aloud, when Mr. Vellicott came in from Netherby with the wet on his shoulders. He was a lean, dry, courteous man of 40-odd, ink-stained at the second finger, with a soft voice and a way of smiling that never once reached his eyes. Miss Fairley, in my passage, so near my office, in his Grace's storeroom. Vellicott. She did not lift her eyes from the slate. Her Grace has set me to number the plate. 11 dozen by the inventory, and I find 4 short, a poor account. You keep a great many books, for a companion. He came a step nearer, soft on his feet for so lean a man. A word of counsel, Miss Fairley, one upper servant to another. This is an old house, and there is a deal of shadow in it, and a young woman with no family and no friend, for you have none, have you? Does best to keep to her presses and her still room, and to ask no question whose answer could do her no good. Companions pass through Ashenmore, few of them remain. It would grieve me to see you leave us early. Elowen set down the slate and looked at him, level and gray and unafraid, and for half a second, under the smile, she saw it plainly. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. He had come in smiling to frighten her, and it was his own fear that had carried him here, because a clever woman with a slate had been standing too near his open door, and because the last clever woman who stood too near it had written, "Where does this go?" in his own book, and was dead inside the fortnight. I keep careful accounts, Mr. Vellicott, she said pleasantly. It is the one thing I do that no one has ever asked me to leave off. She gathered her slate. Good evening. She walked out past him. Her hands did not begin to shake until she reached the stair, and the thought that shook them was not for herself at all. It was, what exactly did Ottilie die of? She could not go to the Duke with a suspicion. A grieving man does not thank a stranger for telling him his sister was robbed, and perhaps worse than robbed, beneath his own roof while he sat signing the thief's papers. He would not believe her, or Vellicott would name her a hysteric, a companion grown above herself, and have her turned off before the week was out. And turned off, she was traced, she was ruined. She needed the thing itself. Not a rumor a clever man could laugh away, but a proof he could not. The true book and the fair book laid side by side, honest witnesses who could not be waved off, and, if there were any truth in the cold thing she now feared, some account of how a hale woman of 33 came to die in 9 days of a spring fever. She needed, for once in her careful, hidden life, to be dangerous. She had nearly talked herself out of it again when the dowager sent her, on a gray morning, with a basket of jelly to a tenant at Marsh Cross. The tenant was Widow Pascoe, 70 years old, whose cottage roof was a sieve, and whose rent had gone up at Lady Day, though nothing under heaven had been done to earn it. Mr. Sivenme, Vellicott says, the master has need of it. the old woman said without a word of complaint, folding her swollen hands. "And his grace is a good man that lost his sister, poor soul, so I'll not grudge it him. I only wonder the roof's never mended that he charged us the mending of 2 years back. But I'd not trouble his grace with so small a thing, not with his grief." Aloan stood in the doorway of the leaking cottage with the jelly in her hands and looked at the old woman, troubling no one, and she was ashamed. For that was the whole of it, laid bare. That was the engine of the thing, plain at last. Velicott had never needed cleverness, only patience. He had raised his whole theft on the decency of others, on a master too broken to look up, on tenants too loyal to make a fuss, on a companion too frightened for her own neck to open her mouth. Everyone tangled in it meant well, and a houseful of kind, frightened, mourning people can be robbed to the floorboards and go on being robbed until a single soul is willing to stand up and be seen. She thought of her father, who had never once turned a sick man from the door for want of a fee, and who would have known in a heartbeat what a daughter of his ought to do here. She thought of Audley, dead in the ground at Netherby, who had asked the one dangerous question and paid for the asking. And she thought, with a cold, clear shame of herself, 2 secrets sewn into a workbox, and a whole winter spent looking the other way, while good people were quietly bled. She had told herself that safety came first, but there was no safety, she saw now, in a house where the truth had been made. A hanging matter. There was only a longer or a shorter wait for the reckoning, and a choice of whether to meet it standing or hidden. She carried the empty basket home, and washed it, and made up her mind. She would build it the way she kept accounts, patiently, on paper, one honest figure at a time. And she would not carry it to the Duke until it was a thing that left him no room to doubt. She built it through the tail of that winter, and into the spring the butcher's notched stick, the chandler's book, the corn factor's receipts. Every figure begged under the honest pretext of settling the kitchen, and copied fare. She had Widow Pascoe and 2 other tenants set their marks to what they truly paid. She could not get at the office again. Velicott kept it locked now, and watched her, but she did not need it. She raised the true reckoning from the outside, from doorsteps and tally sticks and the marks of honest folk, and where her figures met his posted ones, they told the tale in daylight. She kept the copies in the false floor of her workbox, beside her father's book, and added to them by a single candle behind a bolted door, for an unfinished case was more dangerous than none. And while she built it without either of them quite meaning it, she and the Duke came to know one another. It began in the library, the one room he still used. She was sent of an evening to fetch a book for the Dowager, and found him instead, not reading, only sitting with a shut book on his knee and the fire burned low. She made to withdraw. "Stay," he said, "find her book. You are no trouble to me." So she found it, and lingered by the shelves, and they spoke of small things, the frost, the Trowan boy, whether the Ammer would rise. And after that, by no arrangement either would have owned to, she came most evenings, and he was there, and the library became a country the 2 of them shared. He was, she found, precisely what his grandmother had named him, not cold, but a man gone under, a dry humor and a great buried gentleness in him, all turned to grief. He spoke of Audley once, and only once, late with the fire down to embers and his eyes on the coals. She sat in that chair, where you are. She read me the foolish half of the newspaper, until I laughed, which I did not do often. She counted each laugh a victory. He turned the shut book in his hands. "I was 3 days south on business when the fever took her. I stayed a week over it. She was in the ground before I reached the North Road. 3 days of business, and I could not now name you one thing I did in them." Aloan did not tell him she was sorry. She had learned from his grandmother how little that word carries. She said instead, she must have loved this house past telling, to carry it so well. That is a great weight for one woman, and to bear it gladly is a greater. You carry it now, he said, looking up across the embers. Do not imagine I have not seen it. The flue, the table, the tenant's basket's a word out of my niece who has not spoken in 2 years. That is not my grandmother's doing. Her writ does not run so far. The rest is you. A pause. You told me the first hour that you wished to be nothing here, and you have made yourself the beam that holds the roof up. Why? It was the question. She could not answer wholly without answering all of it. So she gave him a true thing that was not the whole thing. Because I was raised by a man who mended people, she said, and I have never once been able to walk past a thing that is hurt and leave it to worsen. A house, a horse, a boy in the rain. It makes no odds. It is no virtue, your grace. It is nearer a fault. I cannot leave a wound to fester. It keeps me from sleep. Something moved behind the shut door of his face. Not quite a smile, but the near edge of one. I begin to think, he said, that this whole house has been one long wound, keeping you from your sleep. It was the dowager who made the thing plain, in the way of old women, which is to say without asking anyone's leave. One afternoon she had a small carved box fetched down, and when Elowen came in for her reading, it lay open on the table, and on a bed of faded velvet inside it lay a great ring of keys, 12 of them, iron and brass worn bright at the wards, with 200 years of turning, the plate room, the presses, the cellars, the still room, the muniment chest. These were Audley's, the dowager said, and her mother's before her. They hung on one hook by the still room door for 200 years. When Audley died, Velicott lifted them off it and locked them in his office. For safekeeping, he said, and my grandson was too far gone to see the lie in it. Give a man every key in a house, and you have handed him the house entire. I have got them back. Do not ask me how. They are yours now, not on the still-room hook, but at your waist, where the whole house can see whose hand turns them. And on the day some man tries to take them off you, for one will you hold fast. Elowen took the keys. They were heavier than she had looked for. She wore them at her waist from that afternoon, and their small iron music went before her down every passage of Ashenmore, so that the maids heard her coming, and the tradesmen at the door heard her coming, and week by week the sound became the sound of the house, remembering how to be a house. And it was the keys, in the end, that opened the last door. For the child had been drawing nearer all that spring, and one afternoon in the still room, Elowen took down the last of Audley's ruined cordial jars and read the round hand on the label aloud, softly, to the air. Feverfew and honey, your mother's own. She wrote everything down, Tamsin, so that nothing good should ever be lost, and the child at her elbow said, in a small, rusty, long unused voice, the first words she had spoken in 2 years, Mama wrote a book. Lowen did not turn quickly. She had gentled frightened things before, and knew the whole world can hang on whether your hand jumps. She set the jar down, slow as a sunrise. Did she? A book like this one? A book of remedies? No. The dark eyes were huge. A secret one. She showed me the place. She said if ever she was poorly I was to give it to Uncle. Only Uncle. Not the ink man. The small face crumpled. But she was poorly, and they wouldn't let me in. And the ink man was always there. And I couldn't make the words come, so I kept it 2 whole years. She was weeping now without a sound. Was it wrong that I kept it? Elowen knelt on the still room floor and gathered the shaking child in. No, my darling, you kept it exactly right. You kept it safe until someone came who would listen. She held her until the weeping eased. Will you show me the place, so we can give your mother's book to Uncle at last? The child nodded against her shoulder. End. They went that evening, while the house was at supper, up the cold stair into the west tower, the shut wing, where the Duke had not set foot in 2 years, where the rain came through the roof that 40 pounds had never mended. Tamsin led her by the hand, sure in the dark of a place she had walked 1,000 times in memory, to the little sitting room that had been her mother's, and to the coal hearth, and to a loose hearthstone at the back of it, which a child's fingers could lift and a grown woman's would never have found. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, dry, and whole, and waiting 2 years in the dark, was a book. And on the stair below them, in the sealed wing where no one ever came, a board creaked beneath a slow foot. The foot on the stair was Halcom's. The old butler came up out of the dark with a candle, and took in the whole of it at a glance, the opened hearth, the oilcloth, the book, the tear-streaked child, the companion on her knees with the face of a woman who has seen her own grave. He did not cry out. 40 years in one house teaches a man to hold his tongue. Her late ladyship's hand, he said quietly. I'd know it, anywhere. I carried your trunk up in the rain, miss, because I judged you worth the wetting, and I've not changed my mind. I love the woman who wrote that book. Tell me what you need. So Aloan told him. Not her own secret, but the theft, the 2 ledgers, Ottilie's queries and the fear beneath them, and they opened the book by his one candle. It was Ottilie's own true reckoning, kept secret through the last months of her life, every theft marked and dated, the fair figures against the real, in the round, careful hand of a woman who knew exactly what she saw. And at the back where the entries thinned, it became a kind of diary. I have spoken to him plainly, one line ran. He denies it and smiles, and I do not trust the smile. And 4 days before she died, I have told him I will lay the whole of it before my brother at the quarter day. He brought me a posset tonight with his own hands, most tender, and begged my pardon, and I begin to think I have wronged him. But I slept ill after, and my heart went strange in me. If I am only tired, I shall laugh at myself come the morning. Aloan looked up from the page and met the old man's eyes across the candle, and neither of them said the word aloud, but it stood in the cold room between them, plain as the book in her hands. Ottilie had not died of any fever. Halcom put it plainest, in the small hours, when the child had been carried up to her bed. Tuscania signed her death of fever, on Velicot's word, and never opened a book to the symptoms, he said, his old voice hard and clean. And it was Velicot carried the posset up. I thought it a kindness. He set his jaw. We build it so it cannot be broken, and we say nothing to his grace till then, for he has been lied to 2 years, and he'll not be moved by less than proof that leaves no room to doubt. So they built it, the 3 of them, an old man, a hunted woman, and a child who had found her voice, until the case stood, link on link, like a wall. But safety, when it breaks, breaks all at once, and it broke on a bright morning in June, from 2 quarters in the same hour. The first was a letter which Halcom brought to her white to the lips. A country attorney in the South, inquiring in the mild way of country attorneys on behalf of his client, Sir Osric Thorne, Baronet, had anyone in the county heard of a physician's orphan of some 22, by the name of Fairley, who had left her people the autumn before last and might be in a genteel situation. Thorne had traced her, and the letter had come first to the one man who would know how to use it, for Velicot had already read it, and the original was 3 hours gone. The second thing broke into the forecourt not 2 hours after, a traveling chaise that came up the Ashenmore Drive at a gallop and stopped at the foot of the steps, and out of it, red-faced and righteous, stepped a stout gentleman in a plum-colored coat, whom Eloin had last seen in a parlor at Wexcombe in an October dusk, swearing to find her wherever she ran. Sir Osric Thorne had not waited for his attorney's answer. He had come himself. Eloin was in the forecourt with a basket of cut roses for the dowager's table when the chaise stopped and the plum coat stepped down. The basket fell from her hands. The roses went everywhere across the gravel, red on gray, where a boy had lain broken on her first day. "There you are," said Sir Osric Thorne with vast satisfaction. "There you are, you thankless, undutiful girl. Do you know what you have cost me in post-horses? Fetch your box, You are going home to be married as your father wished, and there's an end of it." And that was the moment. Of all the moments, the Duke of Ravenshire came down his own front steps. He had heard the chaise. A strange carriage was still faintly his affair. And drawn by the same commotion came the others, the dowager on her stick in the doorway, Tamsin at her skirts, and, soft-footed, smiling, arriving from the garden as though he had been sent for, which, in a manner of speaking, he had, Mr. Min, Velicott, a folded letter in his hand, and, for the first time in 2 years, no fear at all in his face. And there was a fourth, whom Eowyn had almost let herself forget, Mrs. Catter. Sabine Laverge had come to Ashimore in the spring, the Duke's cousin by marriage, a handsome, hard-bright widow of 35, with a thinning jointure, and a design that was the twin of Sir Osric's, though the two had never met. She meant to be the next mistress of Ashimore, if not its Duchess, then the hand behind its shut door. She had made her quiet alliance with Velicott, and her small county debts had been settled out of the same quiet stream. And unlike Velicott, she had seen within a week that the companion was not merely able, but hiding, and had written her own letters. Now she came forward with one in her hand and triumph in her eyes to see the harvest in. "What?" said the Duke, in the voice that had once, they said, stopped a duel in his own park. "Is the meaning of this? It came out all at once, and it came out badly, as such things do." Sir Osric was delighted to find a duke to appeal to, and laid the whole of it before him in his own colors. His ward, his late cousin's daughter, an heiress of a small property in his own honest keeping, promised to his son, fled from her duty like a thief, hidden in service under a false name. And Mrs. Lovard stepped forward with her letter and confirmed each word in her sweet, hard voice. "It is quite true, cousin. I made inquiries for the household's protection, you understand. She is exactly what this gentleman says. A woman of property, playing at being a poor companion. And one does wonder why a woman hides her name and her fortune to scrub linen in a stranger's house, and what else she might be minded to hide. Whose accounts, for instance, she has been so very busy copying by candlelight these 3 months. And there it was, the trap sprung from both sides at once. For if Eowyn now breathed a single word of theft, of ledgers, of Audley, it would sound in that forecourt like precisely what they had made ready for it to sound, the wild counter-charge of an unmasked impostor, flinging mud at honest men to save her own skin. Every face in the court turned to her. She looked at the Duke, and she watched the shut door close behind his eyes. She saw it happen, saw him look at her as he had that first wet evening, as at a figure that would not add, and saw the library go dark behind his face. A hidden name, a hidden fortune, a hidden reason for copying his accounts by candlelight exactly as his cousin said. The one person in 2 years who had looked at him without fear, and she had lied to him from the first hour on the step. And Eowyn found among the fallen roses with 3 enemies ranged against her and the one face she could not bear to lose turning to stone, that she was not afraid anymore. There is something strange in dreading a thing for 2 years, then walking into it and feeling the dread lift and blow off like smoke. All her life she had kept herself unseen to be safe, and now her safety was breaking apart before the whole county, and still the sky held. What was left was only the truth, and the truth asked nothing but to be spoken. "Every word this gentleman has said of me is true," she said, and her voice carried clear and level across the gravel. "I am Eowyn Fairley. My father left me a small fortune in trust and a book of remedies worth far more, and named this gentleman my trustee. I ran because he would marry me to his son sooner than let the book leave his family, and because he promised, if I refused, to swear my dead father a poisoner and see me ruined. I told her Grace I was an orphan without prospects, which was true, for money you cannot touch is no prospect at all. Yes, I hid what was mine, not to deceive a soul beneath this roof, but to keep myself out of a marriage and a debtor's court. I hid it to stay free." She turned from Thorn to the Duke and looked at nothing else. "And yes, I have copied your accounts, 3 months of them, fair and complete, in my room this moment. The true rents against the posted, the tradesman's own tallies against the settled figures, the tenants' marks against the sums they were squeezed for. I did not bring them to you, because I was a coward, and had a secret of my own to guard, and told myself your house was not my affair. I was wrong on every count but the last. It is not my affair. I have made it my affair. You are being robbed, your grace, stripped to the roots these 3 years, by the man at your cousin's shoulder, and I can prove it in an afternoon. For 1 heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Velicott laughed, soft and courteous and pleasant. It was the wrong thing, and he knew it the instant it left him. Guilty men do not laugh at a true reckoning. It was the laugh of a man who has just felt the floor tilt under him. And Mrs. Loveridge's bright face had gone very still. And the Duke of Ravenshire was no longer looking at Elowen as at a figure that would not add. He opened his mouth to speak. He never reached the word. For at that moment, little Tamsin, who had learned in 2 silent years that no one heeds a child who cannot speak, and had found her voice that spring and been saving it seemed for exactly this, walked into the middle of the forecourt, lifted one small steady finger at Mr. Shea. "Velicott," and said, in a voice that rang off the grey stone so that every soul there heard it, "that is the ink man. He brought Mamma the posset. Mamma wrote it in her book. He is the one who wouldn't let me in." And the smile came off Velicott's face. At last. He moved before any of them, not toward the child, but toward the house, toward the north passage and the estate office, and the one thing that could still be made to vanish, the worn brown book, the proof in his own hand. Halcombe lunged and caught air. The Duke shouted. But Velicott was through the door and into the dark of the house he had robbed for 3 years, and knew better than any of them. And by the time they reached the passage, there was smoke sliding under the office door, and the reek of lamp oil, and the crackle of dry ledgers catching. And from the far side of that locked and burning door came a sound that stopped every heart, thin and high and small, a child crying out. For Tamsin had run after the inkman, the man who had kept her from her mother, the man she had waited 2 silent years to name, and he had caught her at the office door, and pulled her in with him, and turned the key. The Duke put his shoulder to the door, and it did not give. It was oak, and it was locked, and behind it a child was screaming, and 3 years of his blindness were going up in flame. The keys. He rounded on them, wild. "Where in heaven's name?" "Here," said Elowen. They had hung at her waist since the dowager gave them to her, their small iron music going before her down every passage of the house, and she had the great ring off her girdle and the office key, worn bright, 2 centuries old. The very key Ottilie had turned 1,000 times into the lock before he had finished the word. The door swung inward on a billow of smoke. What came next took less than a minute, and Elowen carried the pieces of it the rest of her life. The heat like a hand laid flat against the face. Velicott at the far end, feeding the worn brown book into the blaze on the muniment table page by page, his face lit orange, past all reason now, a man burning the only thing that had ever made him more than a servant, and Tamsin on the floor by the door where he had flung her, coughing, alive. Elowen went in low under the worst of the smoke, and had the child up against her chest and back through the door into Halcombe's arms in one motion. A sheet of burning paper came off the table as she turned and caught her sleeve. She smothered it against the passage wall with the child still in her arms. She wore the mark of that afternoon on her forearm to the end of her days, a pale seam she never troubled to hide, and that the Duke of Ravenshire would one day take up and kiss and call the most honest thing in the county. Velicott she left to the smoke, and to the Duke who had come in after them, and who now, for the first time in 2 years raised his hand to a living soul. He stepped between the thief and the door, and put him on the floor with a single blow and stood over him until the grooms came running with water and rope. It was the worn book that was lost. Velikot had burned his own confession, but it changed nothing, for Audely's book had never been in that room. It had lain safe in Elowin's keeping since the night the child led her to the loose hearthstone, and it was the better witness by far, not the accused man's hand, but the dead woman's, and no court in England would doubt it. They laid it all out that night in the library, and it took till the small hours. Halcombe fetched the tradesmen up from Netherby in their Sunday coats, and one by one they set their notched tallies beside Elowin's fair copies and swore to the figures. The butcher, the chandler, the corn factor, the Netherby builder who had never laid a slate over the west tower for all of £40 the fair book said he was paid. The grooms brought the tenants. Widow Pascoe made her mark again by candlelight, and when the living witnesses had done, the Duke opened his sister's book on the table, turned the pages in silence, and read her round, careful hand indicting the man who had smiled at her, and read at the last the posset, and the strange laboring of a strong woman's heart, and the morning that never came. He was a long while quiet when he had finished. He was no fool. He understood the whole of it in the reading, the theft and the death together, and what his own 2 years of not looking had let happen beneath his roof. He set his hand flat on the cover of his sister's book, on everything he had refused to open, and when he spoke it was not to Velikot at all. It was to the shut west tower and to the woman in the ground at Netherby Church. She saw it. She wrote it down. She gave the man a chance to set it right, and he gave her a posset. His voice did not rise. It went the other way, down to the bone. And I was 3 days south, over business I cannot name. This is as much my doing as his. I put my name to whatever he laid in front of me, because signing cost me less than opening her book would have. He looked up, and his face was terrible and awake. Take him to Netherby, he said, tonight. He will answer to the bench for the theft, and to the assize for my sister, and every figure this lady has set down will go with him. He looked down at the pink-shaking man on his library floor. You waited for a house with no one left to look. You very nearly had it. What you did not reckon on was a companion, an old butler and a little girl who could not speak, the 3 smallest souls in the place. Between them, Velikot, it was enough. Heaven help you. At the door, bound, the steward turned once, all the softness gone out of him, the smile gone for good, and looked at Elowin with a hatred that had no courtesy left in it. You could never simply tend your linen and be quiet, he said. No, Elowin agreed. That was never in me. Good night, Mr. Velikot. That left Sir Osric Thorne, who had watched his errand turn to ash, and now blustered, of law and rights and award still promised, until the Duke turned on him a look that stopped the words in his fat throat. Go back to your chaise, the Duke said, and drive through the night, and thank heaven I am too weary to take an interest in a man who would swear a dead physician a poisoner to rob his own ward. Miss Fairley's trust my attorneys examine within the week. A trustee who has spent his ward's money will find the law as ready for him as for a steward who robs a duke. If a shilling of hers has gone astray, you will restore it, or stand where that man stands. Now get off my land. And Sir Osric got off his land, his post-horses unrewarded, and his son unwed. But that is the dry end of the tale, and it can keep. And that left Mrs. Sabine Loveridge, who had sat through the whole long reckoning very still in the corner, her letter crushed to nothing in her lap, watching the machine she had helped to build come apart plank by plank. When Velikot was gone, she rose, still handsome, still upright, and made her last throw with the courage of a gambler staking the rent. You will make a great deal of me now, I suppose, she said to the Duke. Your loyal cousin who paid her little debts through your steward. Oh, I knew where the money came from. Do you suppose a woman as poor as I am does not know to the last farthing where every shilling comes from? You will turn me out. Where to, cousin? I have 100 a year, and a widow's cap. I married where I was bidden and buried him, and got nothing of it but the privilege of being poor among people who were once my equals. You have never once in your life not known where you would sleep. She was shaking, though her chin was high. Do not look at me as though I were some monster. I am only afraid. I have been afraid 15 years, and it is a wearing thing, cousin. You have no notion how wearing it is. And there it was, the human fear beneath the bright, hard shell laid open in the candlelight. The Duke's face had gone hard as the forecourt, and he opened his mouth, and Aloin knew he was about to be just, and that just would be the finish of Sabine Loveridge. Turned out disgraced, 100 a year and a widow's cap, and the whole county to talk of it. Your Grace, Aloin said. May I? He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Aloin crossed to the frightened, upright, hateful woman who had tried that very morning to destroy her. She did not gloat. She had learned long ago that gloating is the one thing a tormentor is braced for, and she had never once in her life handed a tormentor the thing they were braced for. You paid your debts out of the estate, she said quietly. That is theft, and you know it, and so does His Grace. But you falsified no rent. You did not press Widow Pascoe for a shilling at Lady Day. You did not carry a posset up a sick woman's stair. That was Velicot's hand, not yours. You watched, and you profited, and you held your tongue, which is the very sin I was committing myself until this morning, so I am poorly placed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes. There is a small dower house at the edge of the park. It stands empty, and it is sound. A woman might live in it decently on 100 a year, and be neither served nor serving, and cease at last to be so tired. If His Grace is willing, you would owe it to no one, least of all to me. I should like that understood. Sabine Loveridge stared at her. Whatever she had braced herself to meet, it was not this, and it undid her worse than any justice could have. Why? She said. It was not a graceful question. It was torn out of her. Because I know to the ounce how wearing it is, Aloin said. And because a house that has just cast out one thief has no business marking the day by making a beggar. Good night, Mrs. Faster. Loveridge. And the Duke of Ravenshire looked at his grandmother's companion across the wreck of his own long blindness, and something in his face that had been shut since a spring 2 years gone came quietly and painfully open. The great house did not mend all at once, for houses heal the way people do. Slowly and from the inside, but it mended. The rents came in fair now, into a single honest book kept in Aloin's own hand. The true rents and the true repairs, and no worn brown twin standing beside it in the dark. What Velicot had squeezed from the tenants over 3 years was reckoned to the last shilling and given back, cottage by cottage. Where the man himself could not repay it, the Duke made it good out of his own pocket, and counted it cheaply bought. The roof over the West Tower was mended at last, by the Netherby man paid the £40 it truly cost and not a penny over, and the rain stopped falling on a dead woman's chairs. Jory Trewin walked, and then by harvest ran. And Tamsin, who had found her voice in a forecourt and spent it to name a murderer, did not lose it again. She chattered now from morning to night, 2 years of silence let out all at once, and the Duke, who had not been able to look at his sister's child for grief, could no longer be got to set her down. They dealt with Audley properly in the end. The assize did its slow work on Velicot, and it is enough to say he never troubled Ashenmore, nor any other house again. But the truer justice was done at the church, where the Duke had a new stone cut for his sister, and where he went at last into the West Tower and had her rooms thrown open to the light, and kept her true book not as evidence but as what it was, the record of a brave woman who had seen a wrong and set it down in her own hand and paid for it, so that another woman coming after might finish what she had begun. Aloin kept the still-room labels in a drawer, in Audley's round hand. She was not, in the ways that could be managed, let go. And when Aloan came to her 25th year, that next spring, the small fortune fell to her clean and free. Sir Osric having been brought, by the Duke's attorneys in the shadow of the dock, to disgorge every shilling of it he had spent. It was hers. She gave the whole of it to the parish, to raise a physic garden in a room where the poor of the district might come and be tended for nothing out of her father's book of remedies, so that the very thing men had once tried to ruin her to own became, in the end, a gift no one could ever take from her again. What you give away with an open hand, she had learned, is the one sort of wealth that can never be stolen. But that runs ahead of the evening. It all turned on. It was the dowager who decreed it, in the way old women decree things, which is to say, without consulting a soul. There would be a ball at Ashenmore that summer, she announced from the depths of her chair, as there had been every summer in Audley's day. The one night, the shut great rooms were thrown open, and the county driven up the drive and the long gallery filled with candlelight. There had been no ball in 2 years. "The house is breathing again," said Theodosia. "A house that is breathing again ought to be let dance. You will open the rooms, girl, and do the whole of it, and let the county see for once who runs this house, whatever anyone has chosen to call her." So Elowen opened the great rooms. She had the covers struck and 2 years of dust carried out in pails, and she filled the long gallery with early roses and 50 candles of good beeswax that did not smoke, for she had cleaned the sconces with her own hands. She led out, with the dowager's blessing, one of Audley's own gowns, a soft dove gray, plain and unremarkable, precisely the color a crowded room forgets at a scene. She wanted nothing else. She had not come to Ashenmore to be looked at. She was looked at all the same. She was standing at the head of the gallery near midnight, seeing the supper in and the candles trimmed, wholly taken up with her work and wholly unaware of herself, when the Duke of Ravenshire crossed the entire length of the crowded room to reach her. The county saw him do it, which was rather the point, though she did not understand it until afterward. He crossed his sister's ballroom full of every family in the district, and stopped before his grandmother's brown-haired companion in her borrowed gray, and bowed to her as a man bows to a woman he means the whole county to remark. "Miss Fairley," he said, so that a good many heard it, "will you dance?" She had not danced in 3 years. Her feet remembered before her head did, and halfway down the set, beneath the music, the Duke spoke low. "They will talk of nothing else for a 12-month, he said. "They will, your grace. You have quite ruined me. A companion cannot dance with a duke and stay a companion." "No," he agreed. "She cannot." He turned her under his arm, correct as a clock. "I have thought a great deal these 3 weeks about what she might become instead." "Have you?" "I have. My grandmother recommends the office of Duchess. She recommends it with some heat. She says the house cannot spare you, and that she cannot spare you, and that I am a great fool who took a whole season to see what a stable boy's blood and a doctor's roll told her in a single afternoon." Behind the shut door of his face, at last the door stood open. She is very often right. It is her least bearable quality. Alowen's heart was going hard under the gray gown, but she kept her feet in the figure, and kept her voice light, because if she did not keep it light it would break. "And what does the Duke recommend, sir?" setting his grandmother aside. The music turned them. He looked down at her and his face was open all the way, now awake and unguarded and afraid. A man who had learned that spring exactly how much a house can lose while its master will not look. "The Duke recommends nothing," he said. "The Duke has had his fill of putting his name to things he never read. He will set nothing before you to sign, and nothing before you to obey. I'll not offer you a match of convenience, Alowen. Your own money is coming to you, and a name your father left clean. You have no need of any man's roof over your head. Give it a year, and there is not a soul on earth who can spend your fortune or hush you into a corner. You do not need me, and that precisely is why I am asking." He said it quietly, and it went down to the bone. Not because the house wants a mistress, it has one, and has had one, since the day you cut down my table. Because I find I want to spend the rest of my life being looked at squarely by the one person in it who was never for a single moment afraid of me. Marry me because you choose it, or do not, and stay, and run the house. I could not, and I will never raise the question again. It is yours to answer. Everything from here is yours to answer. The whole gallery had gone still. 50 candles, the roses browning in the warm air. 2 years of shut rooms open to the summer night. Aloan looked up at him. She thought of the storm, and the boy she had saved, and the leather roll pressed to her chest, and the 2 years she had meant to spend unseen and safe. Safe was a small word. She had been safe the whole of her life. She had never, until this spring, been truly seen, and had found, to her own astonishment, that all along she had had it backwards. Hiding had never once been the same thing as safety. There was no safe place in all the world like being wholly known by the one who mattered. Alaric, she said. She had never used his name. The gallery heard her use it. He heard her use it, and something crossed his face that was worth more than the fortune, and a house, and the silver-gray land it stood on. That is yes, she said, in case his grace requires it plainly. I have grown very tired of holding my tongue. Yes, I will marry you, because I choose it. She could not help it. The near edge of a smile had found her own mouth now. On one condition, your grace. Name it. Widow Pascoe's roof is mended before the harvest, properly, by the man who is actually paid to mend it. The Duke of Ravenshire threw back his head and laughed, a great, free, astonished sound the county had not heard from him in 2 years, and it carried the length of the bright gallery. And the dowager, from her chair by the door, set down her glass and permitted herself, at 79, to look for one whole moment entirely satisfied. They were married quietly at Netherby Church, where Ottilie lay, in the second week of that high summer. And on a warm evening at the end of that first season, the Duke came looking for his wife, and found her where he had half known he would, in the library, in the chair by the fire, the great honest account book of the estate open on her knee and a single candle burning. She was not reading it. She was only sitting with it, the way a person sits, with a thing that has come right at last. You have set the whole house to rights, he said from the doorway. Fair rent, a sound roof, a child who will not stop talking, and a grandmother grown insufferable with being proved right. There is nothing left in the place that wants saving. Duchess, whatever will you do with yourself now? Aloan looked up at him across the low fire level, and gray, and clear, and unafraid. It was the way she had looked at him from the wet gravel on the first hour of the first day, when she had whispered that she would never be his Duchess, and he had smiled and told her they would see about that. I shall find something, she said. I always do. I cannot leave a wound to fester. You know it is my one great fault. The near edge of a smile. Come and sit down, Aller. You are standing in the doorway with the water over your head. Again he came, and he sat down. The candle burned, and the house breathed around them, mended and honest and full, a house that had held its breath a very long while, and had, that summer, at last been let to loose it. She had come to Ashen Moor to make herself invisible. She had ended as the most closely watched and most openly cherished woman in the county, and she had found, to her lasting surprise, that this was not the fate she had spent her life running from. It was the one she had been running toward the whole time, without ever once knowing its name,